Elara Miles paced the metallic corridors of the Galactic Council's main hub, her boots echoing softly in the bustling thoroughfare of the station. As she maneuvered through the crowd, her eyes scanned the diverse assembly of beings, each representing their species in a myriad of forms, from the shimmering scales of the Aquarite to the feathered crests of the Seraphilites. Elara's mission was clear, yet the weight of it settled heavily on her shoulders. "I heard human diplomats were unpredictable, but seeing one in action is quite the spectacle," murmured a voice beside her. Turning, Elara faced Zealer, the Pleionian envoy, his skin reflecting the artificial light with a subtle glow. His species was known for their sharp intellect and shrewd political acumen. "Unpredictable can sometimes be an asset, Zealer. In a council where everyone plays by the books written eons ago, a little unpredictability might be just what we need to stir the waters of change," Elara responded, her voice carrying a confident, almost playful tone. Zealer chuckled, a low, resonating sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. "Perhaps, but don't let your zest for change burn bridges you haven't yet crossed, Elara. The Raxonite issue is delicate. More is at stake than you might realize." Elara nodded, acknowledging his caution but not deterred by it. "That's exactly why I'm here. To ensure that no single entity monopolizes what rightfully belongs to the collective. You wouldn't happen to know anything about a secret alliance forming in the shadows, would you?" Zealer's eyes narrowed slightly, the glow of his skin dimming. "Rumors are as common as stars in the galaxy, Elara. Be careful which ones you chase." Leaving Zealer behind, Elara continued her way to the council chamber, her mind racing with the fragments of information she had been gathering over the past weeks. Each piece hinted at a deeper conspiracy, one that could potentially tip the balance of power within the council and beyond. Inside the chamber, the air was thick with anticipation. Rows of delegates sat, their voices a low, constant murmur under the domed ceiling. Elara found her seat among the human delegation, her gaze sweeping over the assembly. Today was merely a prelude to the negotiations, a formality riddled with pomp and circumstance, yet essential as ever in the dance of diplomacy. As the Grand Arbiter, a venerable figure from the ancient race of the Keepers, took the podium, silence gradually descended. "Esteemed delegates, today we open discussions on a matter of significant import, the mining rights of the newly discovered Raxonite planet. Let us proceed with the dignity and foresight that befits this council." One by one, representatives from the major species made their case, their words measured, their intentions masked behind layers of diplomatic speak. Elara listened, her mind noting discrepancies, reading between the lines of what was said and what was carefully omitted. When it was her turn to speak, Elara stood, her presence commanding attention. "Esteemed members of the council, we stand at a crossroads. The discovery of Raxonite presents us with a unique opportunity. Not for profit, not for power, but for unity. It is a chance to set a precedent for how we, as a collective of diverse species, handle the gifts of the universe." A murmur rippled through the chamber, some nods of agreement mingling with skeptical glances. "However," Elara continued, her voice firm, "there are troubling whispers of secret pacts and backdoor deals that threaten to undermine the very fabric of our council. I urge each one of you to consider the implications of such actions. Today, we must decide whether we rise together or fracture, leaving the galaxy a fragmented shadow of what it could be." As she sat, the chamber buzzed with renewed chatter. Some delegates looked perturbed, others intrigued. Elara's words had struck deeper than she might have anticipated, sowing seeds of doubt and caution among her peers. The session adjourned with unresolved tensions and unsettled plans. Elara knew her work had just begun. Back in her quarters, her communication device blinked, a message from an anonymous source. "Meet at the zero-gravity gardens. There's more you need to know." Under the pale light of the station's artificial stars, Elara made her way to the gardens, a place where politics seemed a distant concern amidst the floating flora. Her contact was already there, a silhouette against the nebulous glow of the bioluminescent plants. "You were impressive in there." The figure spoke as she approached, the voice distorted. "Who are you? Why help me?" Elara asked, her stance cautious but open. Because, like you, I believe some things are worth protecting from the shadows. What you've heard is just the tip of the iceberg. The Alliance is real, and it's not just about Raxonite. It's about control, about reshaping the Council's future to their design. The figure handed her a data chip. This has what you need to expose them, but be careful, Elara. They're watching now. As Elara clutched the chip, the gravity of her mission settled in anew. She was no longer just a diplomat. She was a keeper of balance, and the game was far from over. The story was set, the players defined, and her moves hereafter would determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. Elara clutched the data chip tightly in her hand, the weight of its contents more profound than its physical presence. She returned to her quarters, her mind racing with possibilities and the perils they entailed. There, she interfaced the chip with her secure console, layers of encryption unfolding to reveal the secrets it held. Documents, communications, transaction logs, all painting a clear picture of a clandestine alliance among several dominant species, all orchestrated by a shadowy figure known only as the Void. As she absorbed the information, the door chimed softly, a prearranged signal. In walked Joran, a fellow human delegate and her closest ally. "I saw your speech. It stirred more than just applause," he remarked, his eyes scanning her for signs of the strain. Elara nodded, handing him a tablet displaying some of the decrypted files. "It's worse than we thought. This isn't just about monopolizing resources, it's a play to control the Council itself. The Void is planning to use the chaos of the negotiations to initiate a coup." Joran browsed through the documents, his frown deepening. This could tear the Council apart. If these species succeed, it could lead to an era of dictatorship under the guise of unity. We need to expose this, Elara, but carefully. The wrong move could put you in immense danger. Elara's resolve hardened. "I know, but as long as this is secret, we're all in danger. We need to bring this to the Council, but in a way that doesn't tip off the Void or their allies until it's too late for them to react." The pair strategized late into the night, formulating a plan to introduce the evidence subtly during the next Council session. They decided to encrypt the information into a benign Council proposal document, an economic report, camouflaging the real data to be revealed only through a specific decryption key phrase that Elara would deliver during her speech. The following day, Elara walked into the Council chamber with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The chamber was buzzing as usual, a cacophony of alien dialects, and the rustle of beings settling into their places. As the session began, one after another, delegates discussed the implications of the mining rights, their words veiling their greed with diplomacy. Finally, it was Elara's turn to speak. She approached the podium, her gaze sweeping across the assembly, meeting eyes that held various shades of suspicion, curiosity, and a few, veiled hostility. "Esteemed Council members," she began, her voice calm but carrying across the chamber. "I stand before you not just to discuss the future of a single planet, but the integrity of our entire Council. Today, I present an economic report that sheds light on the potential outcomes of our decisions regarding Raxonite mining rights." As she spoke the agreed phrases woven into her speech, Joran discreetly activated the decryption algorithm from his console. Screens around the room flickered momentarily before displaying the hidden files, exposing the depth of the conspiracy for all to see. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Outcries echoed around the room, delegates rising from their seats, some in outrage, others in disbelief. The leading figures of the secret alliance were visibly shaken, caught off guard and unable to deny the evidence displayed for all to witness. Elara continued, her voice rising over the tumult. "This is not the future we should choose. We stand at a crossroads between division and true unity. Let us choose a path that leads not to the dominion of a few but to the shared prosperity of all." The Grand Arbiter called for order, his voice booming across the chaos. "We will have calm. Let us discuss this like the civilized beings we are meant to be." The chamber slowly settled, a tense silence taking over. In the ensuing discussions, it became clear that the impact of Elara's revelations would be profound. The alliance crumbled as its members distanced themselves from the scandal. Debates raged not just about the mining rights, but about how to restructure the council's governance to prevent such conspiracies in the future. As the session adjourned, Elara felt a mix of relief and weariness. Joran met her at the chamber's exit, a small smile breaking through his usually stoic demeanor. "That was a masterstroke, Elara. You've not just averted a crisis, you've paved the way for a new era of governance." Elara smiled, feeling the weight of her actions. "Today, we reminded them that no one voice should drown out the chorus of the galaxy. Let's hope this is just the beginning of what we can achieve." As they left the chamber together, the weight of their achievement and the road ahead lay heavily upon them, but so did a sense of hope. The council would recover, perhaps stronger and more united than before. And Earth, under Elara's representation, had just positioned itself as a key player in the future of galactic diplomacy. The game had changed, and they were now leading it. As the council reconvened the following day, the atmosphere was markedly different. The shockwaves of Elara's revelation still reverberated through the hall, each delegate acutely aware that the eyes of the galaxy were upon them, watching how they would handle the fallout. Elara sat quietly, her expression composed but her mind active, preparing for the next phase of her strategy. She knew that exposing the conspiracy was only the first step. The real challenge lay in steering the council towards meaningful reform. The session began with the Grand Arbiter addressing the chamber, his voice solemn. "We are faced today not just with a crisis of governance but with an opportunity to redefine what our unity stands for. Let us proceed with the proposals for reform with the gravity they deserve." One by one, delegates proposed changes to the council's policies and governance structures. Ideas flew back and forth, some suggesting tighter security measures, others advocating for more transparent decision-making processes. Elara listened, waiting for her moment to contribute. When it came, she rose, her presence commanding silence. "While these proposals are a step in the right direction, we must dig deeper. True reform isn't just about preventing another conspiracy, it's about fostering an environment where such schemes find no fertile ground to take root." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I propose the establishment of a multi-species oversight committee, one that includes representatives from all member species, not just the dominant ones. This committee would have the power to audit any council decision, ensuring that all voices are heard and that no single group can dominate the council's agenda." Murmurs filled the chamber, some nods of agreement mingling with skeptical frowns. Elara continued, "Furthermore, we must address the root of the issue, the disproportionate influence that comes from controlling resources like Raxonite. I suggest we draft a new charter for resource sharing, one that ensures equitable distribution based on need, contribution, and sustainability." This proposal sparked a heated debate. Some delegates pushed back, arguing that such measures would infringe on their species' sovereignty. Others praised the vision, calling it a bold step towards true interstellar cooperation. As the arguments swirled around her, Elara engaged with each point, countering objections with reasoned arguments, drawing on the data from the exposed documents to highlight the dangers of unchecked power. The session stretched on, the debates intense and exhaustive. As it neared its end, the Grand Arbiter called for a preliminary vote to gauge support for Elara's proposals. The votes were cast, and the chamber held its breath as the results were displayed. The majority was in favor, a slim but clear mandate for change. Elara's heart lifted slightly, but she knew the hardest part was still to come, turning these resolutions into reality. After the session, as the delegates dispersed, Elara was approached by a figure she hadn't expected, Scylla, the representative of the Aquarii, whose species had been part of the secret alliance. Scylla's expression was unreadable, her eyes flickering with a complex mix of emotions. "Elara, may I speak with you?" she asked, her voice neutral. Elara nodded, leading them to a quieter spot near the chamber's exit. "What is it, Scylla?" I wanted to thank you," Scylla began, hesitantly. "My people were misled by the Void's promises. We didn't foresee the harm it would bring, not just to others but to our own honor." Elara regarded her thoughtfully. "It takes courage to admit that, Scylla. Your support for the new proposals could be a way to mend those bridges." Scylla nodded, her stance easing slightly. I intend to advocate for them, yes. Perhaps together, we can ensure that this council stands not for the few, but for all the galaxy. As Scylla left, Elara allowed herself a small smile. It was a minor victory, perhaps, but every ally mattered. The days ahead would require all her diplomatic skills and resilience, but she was ready. Ready to fight for a council, and a galaxy, that truly represented its diverse and vibrant communities. With a renewed sense of purpose, Elara returned to her quarters, her mind already plotting the next steps. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time, she felt a cautious optimism. The council was changing, and she was at the heart of that change. As the stars shone brightly outside her window, mirroring the flicker of possibilities, Elara Miles prepared for the future, one she would help shape for the betterment of all. Elara stepped into the private diplomatic chamber, where the real battle would take place. The official council meetings were theater, a performance meant for the public and lesser delegates. Here, behind closed doors, the true power brokers gathered, species that had shaped galactic history for millennia. The air was thick with tension, the silent kind that only seasoned diplomats could perceive. A towering Zelvari representative regarded her with narrowed, luminous eyes. You've made quite the spectacle, human. Exposing that conspiracy, bold but reckless. Elara met his gaze without flinching. Reckless would have been letting it continue. A low, rumbling chuckle came from a reptilian Gorak delegate. And what now? You've forced our hand, but don't think for a moment that means you've won. Joran stood beside her, arms crossed. Depends on how you define winning. The council voted, and the new oversight committee is happening. Scylla, representing the Aquarii, leaned forward, her liquid-like eyes unreadable. Your proposal threatens to weaken the influence of the core worlds. Do you really believe the dominant species will accept it without resistance? Elara exhaled slowly. I believe they have no choice. The galaxy is watching. If the council resists change now, it risks tearing itself apart. You know that. The silence that followed wasn't one of agreement, but of calculation. The Zelvari folded his arms, his bioluminescent patterns flickering. Let's assume we tolerate your oversight committee. What guarantee do we have that humans won't use it to their advantage? You say you want equality, but history teaches us that new powers rise the same way old ones fall. Elara leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough to command attention. The guarantee is that without it, this council won't last another decade. The smaller species will rebel, the alliances will fracture, and the wars you all fear will become inevitable. The choice isn't between power and no power. It's between controlled change or complete collapse. The Gorak delegate sneered. And what makes you so certain humanity isn't just another opportunistic species, waiting for its turn on the throne? Elara allowed herself a small smile. Because we've spent most of our existence as the underdog. Because we know what it's like to claw our way up against impossible odds. And because, unlike some of you, we don't see unity as a means to power, we see it as survival. A beat of silence passed, then Scylla sighed. You're right about one thing, Elara. The galaxy is changing. The question is whether we shape that change or get consumed by it. The Zelvari nodded slowly. We will allow the committee to proceed. But be warned, if it becomes a tool for human expansion, we will not stand idly by. Elara nodded. That's all I ask? A fair system benefits us all. The meeting adjourned with murmurs of grudging acceptance. Some left with narrowed eyes, others with resigned understanding. Joran walked beside her as they exited into the main hall, where the council chamber loomed ahead. Well, he muttered, that could have gone worse. Elara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It could have gone a lot worse. But we have the opening we need. Now we just have to make sure they don't sabotage the reforms before they take effect. Joran smirked. You really think they'll let this committee operate freely? She met his gaze. Not a chance. But we'll be ready. The real fight was only beginning. Elara sat alone in the dimly lit council chambers, the hum of distant voices fading as delegates dispersed. The official discussions had ended, but the battle had only just begun. She had secured the Oversight Committee's approval, but she wasn't naive. The powerful species of the Council would not accept this shift without resistance. There would be pushback, covert sabotage, bureaucratic delays, and political maneuvering. She had expected this. She was prepared. A soft chime signaled an incoming transmission. Joran's voice crackled through her earpiece. You should head back to the human delegation quarters. There's already talk of a countermeasure. She exhaled. How bad? Enough that I'd rather tell you in person. She made her way through the station's winding corridors, passing clusters of delegates engaged in hushed conversations. The air was thick with uncertainty. When she entered the human delegation's private office, Joran was already reviewing a classified document. His expression was grim. They're moving fast, he said, sliding the data pad toward her. A coalition of core species is drafting a motion to review and refine the committee's authority before it's formally enacted. Elara scanned the text, her jaw tightening. They're trying to neuter it before it even begins. Joran nodded. They'll argue it's a necessary safeguard, but we both know what this is: stalling tactics, revision loopholes, legal tangles. If they succeed, the committee will become nothing more than an advisory board with no real power. She set the pad down, her mind racing. We need to counter before this gains traction. Who do we still have on our side? Scylla is committed, Joran said. A handful of the smaller species too. But the heavyweights? The Zelvari and Gorak are already negotiating among themselves. If they flip, it's over. Elara leaned back, tapping her fingers against the desk. Then we have to make sure they don't. Joran raised an eyebrow. How? They're not exactly the type to be persuaded by ideals. She met his gaze, a plan already forming. They may not be, but they are persuaded by power. They need to see that resistance is more costly than cooperation. Joran crossed his arms. And how do we do that? She stood. By reminding them what's at stake. They think delaying the committee will strengthen their grip, but we're going to show them that stalling is what puts them at risk. Later that evening, the private conference hall was filled with the most powerful delegates. The tension was palpable, every representative aware that tonight's discussion would shape the next moves in the power struggle. Elara took the floor. I know why you're here, she said, her voice carrying authority. You believe that by reshaping the committee's authority, you can prevent it from disrupting your influence. But let's be clear, weakening the committee weakens this council. If we fail to enact real reform, the consequences will be irreversible. The Zelvari delegate leaned forward, his glowing eyes narrowing. And what consequences would those be, exactly? She stepped forward. Dissent is growing among the outer systems. They see this council as an outdated institution that serves only the elite. They tolerated it before because they had no choice. But now, with new alliances forming beyond our jurisdiction, with independent trade networks rising, they're starting to realize they don't need us. They're starting to talk about breaking away. A murmur rippled through the room. The idea of secession was a specter that haunted every major power. Elara pressed on. If this committee is gutted, it will send a message that the council is unwilling to change. That the powerful will always serve themselves first. And when that message spreads, do you really think those outer systems will keep playing by the rules? The Gorak delegate growled, his voice thick with skepticism. And you expect us to believe that the only way to prevent this is by handing control over to your so-called oversight committee? I expect you to understand that the alternative is worse. She countered. You want to delay this, but delay breeds instability. You think you're preserving your power, but you're accelerating its downfall. Silence stretched across the room. The reality of her words was undeniable. The cracks in the council's foundation were real. Ignoring them wouldn't make them disappear. The Zelvari delegate exhaled slowly. If we agree to let the committee proceed unimpeded, we will expect guarantees, real ones. Elara nodded. And you will have them. A rotational leadership structure within the committee. An equal say for all species, human or otherwise. But no single faction will have the power to override it. This must be a true collective effort. The Gorak delegate grunted. A compromise, then. Scylla, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. One that will keep this council from crumbling. A final pause. Then, one by one, reluctant nods. The coalition's resistance was breaking. Elara allowed herself a breath. This wasn't total victory, nothing in politics ever was, but it was enough. The committee would stand. The council would change. The future, uncertain as it was, remained in their hands. As the meeting adjourned, Joran fell into step beside her. You actually pulled it off. She allowed a small smile. For now. He chuckled. That's as close to optimism as I've ever heard from you. She looked ahead, where the corridors stretched toward an unknown tomorrow. Let's just make sure it lasts.